This video has been sponsored by Toybox. So the creators of Thump 1 are back with a new synthesizer. This one is called Buzz Zone, and even though it might look like Thump 1, it is a different beast altogether. Now granted, Buzz Zone is a wavetable synthesizer just like Thump 1, and it is still using those brilliant multi-segment envelopes to modulate all the different sections inside the synth. But here is also where they start to differ. You see, Buzz Zone is a polyphonic synthesizer designed for making pad sounds and leads. And it's doing it in this way where you actually get to mix the pure synth engine with a sample player engine. Now on top of the wavetable synthesis and the powerful multi-segment envelopes, you've got stuff like amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, filter frequency modulation. You've got subtractive synthesis, and you have a wide range of selectable modes with everything from 4-pole silent key and OTA filters up to comb and formal filtering. Then on top of that, you got stuff like frequency shifting, ring modulation, and you've even got wave folding in here. Now all of that modular synth power makes a lot of sense if you consider what Toybox Audio has made in the past for desktop and laptop systems. What you're seeing here are some of their products, and yeah, they're very modular. Now there's more. There is a big library of wavetables, there is a unison mode, you can completely switch out the filter modules in both the synth and sample engines. And the sample engine of course comes packed with a sample library, but you can also load your own. Now on top of that you have a massive amount of global effects, and you get to modulate most of what you see here with those multi-segment envelopes, and this time you can loop them and use them as weird LFOs. Now there is a lot to get through here. However, before we actually get started, I just want to show you one of the coolest modes inside the synth. Like I told you earlier, you can completely switch out the filter modules in both engines. Well, in the sample engine, there is a vocoder module, and if you load a vocal sample, you get something sounding like this. I love it that they put it in here. I love the fact that they chose to emulate the 70s era vocoder sound, but I want to clarify that there is no live microphone input in the synthesizer. This thing is here only to process samples, and those samples don't have to be vocal samples, so you can pretty much run anything through here. So I think it's time we dive into Buzz Zone. Oh, and by the way, hello my beautiful viewers, welcome to haQ attaQ. My name is Jakob, and you're watching a haQ attaQ episode. One of the things I really like with Buzz Zone is what you see is what you get. It has its main features right there on the main page. That doesn't mean that there aren't any menu diving at all. There are some menus, but it's not too bad. However, I want to show you one menu right away, and that is here in the cogwheel menu. First, I want to highlight two things. There is one option here for ticking in a box for high quality filters, which will make the filters sound better at the expense of processing power. And then down here, the most important feature right now is the polyphony. You can have up to 5 voices that you can play at the same time, or you can play Buzz Zone as a mono-ish synth, but with a stack of either 3 or 5 voices at the same time. Now remember, when you are adding polyphony, you are also taking more resources from the system. But yeah, polyphony is really important for Buzz Zone because it was made for making pad sounds and lead sounds, and that's why I wanted to show you this first. Now on the right side here, you have options for setting up expressivity for keyboards. So basically, if you want to control stuff with aftertouch or mod wheel or maybe velocity, you can do that. And you don't have to stick with what's already here. If you look closely, you can see that there's an arrow here, and that means that you have a menu with more items in it. So you can pretty much set it up any way you want. Just select an option and then just tweak this knob to your liking, and there you go. Now, if we drunkenly slide back over to the left side, we can see that we have an option for resetting the oscillators with key presses. We have a pitch key follow for the filter cutoff, and we also have a pitch follow for the sample engine. Oh, and let's not forget about legato and glide. Now we can jump out of this menu by pressing the big X up here, and we're back on the main page. Now, sticking with the basics, I want to bring your attention to these two buttons here. It's the undo and redo. So if you end up doing any doo-doo in the synth, you can undo the doo-dooing by pressing undo. And no, I'm never gonna stop with that joke. Now, Buzz Zone, of course, supports AUE3 and can be loaded into any AUE3 supporting host, but if you want to run Buzz Zone as a standalone, you can, and when you do, you might want a keyboard, which you can access right over here. Now, if we move over to the middle of the synth, we can see this thing here, which is the master pitch, and it will actually adjust the pitch of the entire synthesizer. That includes the synth engine and the sample engine. The next button here is stereo width, which will widen the stereo image by chorusing and detuning the sound. Now, that's not the only thing it does, because it also separates the two oscillators. So it will push the main oscillator out on the left side and the harmony oscillator out on the right side. Now the third knob is the effect depth control, and it works like a wetness level for the effect that you've chosen. And I say that because if we press this down arrow, we have a list of effects. Now in here we can find a bunch of different reverb algorithms. We can find everything from small rooms to weird ambiances up to huge caverns and halls. And if we go further down the list, we can find chorus, phaser, flanger, distortion, echo, and wavefolder. And I say wavefolder last because that's one of the coolest effects in here. I'm skipping these two knobs because we'll talk about that in the envelope section of this video. And lastly, I want to mention what's up in this bar. Here we have a preset browser, and of course Buzzone comes packed with presets when you buy it. If you don't want to make your own, you don't have to. But if you do want to make your own and you do want to save them, then you do it right here. Now there are two randomization options in here. The randomize preset one will completely randomize all of the parameters inside the preset, and the mutate preset will only slightly adjust all of the parameters in the preset. And none of them will actually do anything to the multi-segment notes. What's so nice here is that we have a way of quickly randomizing stuff from the main page without ever having to go into the menu, and it's through the dice here next to the logo. Now this one will perform a randomization based upon what you pressed on last. In other words, if you pressed on mutate preset last, then that's what the dice will do. Now up here we have a global volume control, and then lastly we have a menu that contains a lot of really nifty options. If you, for instance, sat down and worked on an envelope shape for quite some time in one of the engine sections here and you want to copy it and paste it into another section, you can do that through this menu. You also have stuff like flipping the envelope upside down, clearing envelope, reversing it, and then we of course have a MIDI learn system in here where you can map your MIDI controls to controls inside the synth. And lastly, if you need a manual, you have a link to that manual right in this menu at the bottom. So at the heart of Buzzone, we have multi-segment envelopes. They're in every section of both the synth engine and the sample player engine. And what they actually modulate is the top row of knobs in all of the sections in both the synth and sample engines. Now, if we zoom in on those two knobs we skipped earlier, then we have one here called speed. This one basically controls the playback speed of all of the envelopes. Twisting it clockwise makes the envelopes faster, and twisting it counterclockwise makes the envelopes slower. Now the second knob here, called release, is actually a control for the amp envelope and will control how fast or how slowly the sound will decay after releasing keys. Now something to highlight here is that this speed control is global. It will affect all of the envelopes at the same time. However, when you are looping the envelopes, you do have an individual rate control also. Now each envelope have their own individual loop switch, and you can find it down here in the lower right corner. Now as soon as we turn it on, we can also see the individual rate control. Now if we press down and drag this up, we can multiply the bass speed, and if we drag it down, we can divide it. So basically pulling it up makes it go faster, and pulling it down makes it go slower. Alright, so the most powerful thing about a multi-segment envelope is that you can have multiple segments in there. And in Buzzone, we can create our segments ourselves. And we do that by double tapping on the line. So once you've made a node, you can drag it around and place it anywhere you want. Now to remove a node, you simply double tap on that node and it disappears. Now, I am uncertain how many nodes you can actually have in here, and instead of asking the developer, I just sat down and made a preset with a bunch of them. I made up to 40, and you can still add more, but I think that's quite enough.
How to Neuro.
Now, there's nothing wrong with regular waveforms such as sine or square waveforms, and you can still make those in these envelopes. But it's the power of making something like this, and this that I love so much. It doesn't quite stop there, because you also have various sync modes for the looping. So when you turn on the looping, you can go up here and you can open this little menu with this down arrow, and you can set the sync mode. And here we have 5 options. Now in free, you have free running looping envelopes. They're not re-triggered by MIDI notes. They will just run free any way they want. In re-trigger mode, it pretty much is what it sounds like, but the loop speed is synchronized to the host tempo, and you can then re-trigger the loops with MIDI notes. Now in locked mode, the loop speed is synchronized to the host. However, the loop's playback position is locked to the host's transport. Now, for the pitch, the loop speed is actually synchronized to the pitch of the incoming MIDI notes. And Chaos basically synchronizes the loop position to a random generator. Now, to finish off this section in the video, I just want to remind you of this menu up here where you can copy and paste envelope shapes, you can flip the envelopes, you can reverse envelopes, and you can clear envelope shapes. Okay, this is my most favorite part because the synth engine is beefy as f. So we're zooming in on the first section here, and the first knob is the main pitch for the synth engine. Now, right below it, we have a knob called harmony, and this is actually the level control for the second oscillator inside the Buzzone synth engine. Now, one thing to note here is that we have a way of actually changing the behavior of the harmony oscillator. If we open up this menu here next to the harmony knob, we have some pitch intervals for the oscillator. We got fifth, third, minor, octave, and below. The unison mode will set the bass pitch of the harmony oscillator to the same as the main oscillator, but then you can use the detuning knob over here to detune and offset the pitch between the two oscillators for a rich chorus-like sound. Now the fixed mode will disconnect the harmony oscillator pitch from both the pitch knob and the envelope. This provides the user with a way of actually setting their own interval because the main oscillator is still tied to the pitch knob and the envelope. Next we get to some more synth nerdy options, and these are my favorite ones. Starting with FM, it's basically like a DX7 mode built into the synth, and when you set it to this, you're using the harmony oscillator to modulate the phase of the main oscillator. Now, when you set it to the AM mode, you're using the harmony oscillator to modulate the amplitude of the main oscillator. Now, when selecting the ring modulation mode, which is a dope mode that sounds very FME and very harsh at times, but in this mode, the main oscillator is being modulated not by the harmony oscillator, but by a sub-oscillator. Now the filter FM mode is quite interesting because this will use the harmony oscillator to modulate the filter cutoff knob. It's basically like FM modulation for the cutoff. Lastly, we have two sub-oscillator modes, and these are a bit special because apart from just running lower octaves, one lower than the other, these are using sine wave oscillators instead of the harmony oscillator. Now, even though they're using sine waves, we can still reshape them with stuff like offset, FM, and feedback control. Right, so if we move on, we have a unison section. And when you're tweaking this knob up, you're adding an additional 60 tuned copies of the wavetable oscillator. Now, right below the main unison knob, you have a detuning knob, and this will basically offset the pitch between the voices. And again, if you are using the unison mode for the harmony oscillator, this will also detune that oscillator. Next, we have a section for the wavetable playback position. Now, the big knob up here is called position, and it sets the current wavetable playback position. Now, the knob underneath is called offset, and this will offset the wavetable playback position for the harmony oscillator only. Now, one thing to note here is that you won't actually hear any difference when tweaking this knob if you don't have the level turned up for the harmony oscillator. Now, I've pretty much been playing the same wavetable for you this whole time, but you can easily switch it out down here on these arrows, and we can even open this up to see the library of wavetables that come packed with Buzzone. Now, if there's anything in here that you can't find, or if there's something you want to add, then you're in luck because Buzzone supports loading any standard type of wavetable file. And if you're wondering if you can even load single cycle samples like the ones from Adventure Kid here, by the way, then the answer is yes. Just remember, you won't actually be able to scan through it like a wavetable since it's not a wavetable, it's a single cycle sample. It only contains one waveform. And Buzzone will even show you that in the graph here. Look at that, so tiny. So we get to the filter section, and here there is a lot to choose from. If we open up this list and look at the 4-pole, ladder, OTA, silent key, state variable, and acid, these are all low-pass filters with resonance control. So in these modes, you're basically controlling the filter cutoff with the big knob, which is modulatable, and then the resonance with the smaller knob. Now, the bandpass and high-pass filters have the same type of controls as the low-pass filters. And now we start to get into the not so standard type of filters, like a vowel filter, which is a formant filter. In this mode, you're controlling the vowel with the big knob and then the resonance with the smaller knob. The multi-notch filter is what it sounds like. It's a series of notches spread out over a few frequencies, and when you're steepening the notches of these filters with the smaller knob, it can get this very ringy sound to it, very metallic sound to it, and it's very effective to use on drum-like sounds. Here we go, Car plus strong type synthesis. The comb filter is basically a short-tuned delay, and this one can get pretty wild when you tweak up the resonance knob here. So pull down on the volume a little bit right before you do that, because the thing can get very, very loud. Now, when used correctly, you can get this to sound very string-like, but you can also make sounds that kind of sounds as if they've got flangers on them. Now, there is another module in here that also sticks within the realms of Car plus strong or resonator synthesis, and that is the chorus one, because it can go into full resonator territory if you pull up on the resonance control all the way up. Maybe you're a SID head like me and you're into chiptune music. Well, if you are, then you probably don't want to be without a bit crusher. That's what this is. You control the sample rate with the big knob and the amount of resonance in the filtering circuit with the smaller knob. The frequency shifter is kind of like a really, really bad pitch shifter. It doesn't shift anything up by factors. No, it's shifting all of the frequencies up by the same amount. And this will result in bell-like sounds, but with weird, messed up harmonies in them. I absolutely love stuff like this. Ring modulation is another one of those types of synthesis methods I absolutely love because it can create some really harsh stuff, and when you use it on lower frequencies, well, you can make some crazy sounding bass sounds. It's kind of like amplitude modulation, only it works a little bit differently. I am absolutely in love with modules that will let me do surgical things with waveforms, to shape them, smash them, cut pieces out and replace them with other things, which is why I spent a whole year building a Eurex system and adding such modules to that system. In fact, I'm so insanely obsessed with wave folders. I have two of them in my small rack. There's one in the Mavis and there is one down here, and technically there is a third one because the Soviet, which is a wave shaper, also folds my waves. Either way, I urge you to mess around with the wave folder, and when you're doing that, make sure you keep the volume in check because the sounds tend to get very harsh at times. And when you are tweaking around with stuff like the wave folder, ring modulation, and frequency shifter, just do it with smaller knob movements because these modules, they do have sweet spots all over the place. And if you're into neuro like bass, then these types of modules are your absolute friends. As you can see, there is a lot of synthesis power in buzz zone. However, it doesn't stop there because now we've reached the FM section. And here we have frequency modulation. So the big knob controls the FM depth and the smaller knob controls the FM pitch. Now, the last section in the synth engine is the level section. So the big knob controls the overall volume for the synth engine, and then the smaller knob underneath is an internal FM feedback control. So yeah, you've got frequency modulation at the end of the signal chain. So the sample player is basically a monophonic sample player. And if we tap down here, we can reach the library of samples. Now, most of these samples are pretty short, and you can find anything from clicky sounds to noise sounds, all the way up to drum sounds, and there's even synth stabs and sampled instruments. And if you want to load your own, you can do that because Buzzone ties into the file system, so you can reach whatever audio file you might have stored or tucked away somewhere. And if you do end up loading your own, then you have a sample length limit of about 20 seconds. So we have three main sections inside the sample player engine, and the first one deals with pitch. The big knob controls the main pitch of the sample, and you can of course modulate that with an MSEG. Now you do have a detuning knob underneath the pitch knob, and even though this is a monophonic sample player engine, it still uses two voices that you can detune for a richer sound. The next section is the filter section, and it has a reduced amount of filter modules because some of those modules wouldn't make any sense really when you're using them with a one-shot sample sound instead of a continuously sounding oscillator. So I'm not going to go through all of these filter modules again, but I will highlight how this section works a little bit differently compared to the one for the Synth Engine. So when you're using the regular filters in here, then the big knob will control the filter cutoff. However, the smaller knob is not controlling resonance. No, there is a drive circuit in here now. And so with this small knob, you're controlling the amount of drive. Okay, so even though the filter section has been reduced for the sample engine, there has been something added here, and that is the vocoder. Now, I've already shown you this one, but I didn't really tell you what the knobs do. So there are three knobs you need to be concerned with when you've got the vocoder selected. So there's this one, which controls the offset of the filter bank frequencies for the 4-band shift. And then you have the resonance knob, which controls the resonance of the filter banks. And then you've got the detuning knob, which turns into a spread knob. And it basically spreads out the frequency bands of the filter bank. Lastly, we have the level section of the sample engine, and here the big knob controls the overall volume of the sample engine, and this is of course modulatable. And then the smaller knob underneath controls FM depth, and this is actually using the output of the synth engine to modulate the sample engine. There is a way to actually get the sample to re-trigger every time the loop of an MSEG restarts. So we have to make sure that the MSEG is looped, and then we get this option. And if we activate this, the sample will re-trigger at the beginning of every new loop. The biggest strength of BuzzZone is that it is packing so much synth power in a very minimalistic user interface. And thanks to all of that synthesis power, it also has an extremely wide sound palette. With just a small tweak of one or two knobs, you can go from fat sounding atmospheric sounds and pads all the way down to short stabs and kick sounds. When I work with BuzzZone, I feel like I have the power of this hidden behind the interface of something akin to this. And all that modular synth power makes a lot of sense when you look at Toybox Audio and what they've done before. The multi-segment envelope slash LFOs, if you loop them, is an added +2 because there's so much you can do with them. And sure, I can get the appeal of having a regular styled ADSR with just 4 controls because it's easy to control and it's easy to learn, but in the case of Buzzone, where the interface is already limited in a good way, I really don't mind that there is more to do with the envelopes. Yeah, so far I absolutely love Buzzone, but I do have some critique. And my first bit of criticism is that the trigger modes for looping envelopes gets applied to all of the looping envelopes. So if I wanted to, for instance, have the random triggering mode for just the looping envelope on the wavetable position and some other type of trigger mode in some of the other sections, I couldn't do that right now because they all get that same triggering mode that you're selecting. Now, whenever I do a review of a product, I always make sure to send my biggest critiques off to the developers responsible for that product so that they can give their 5 cents about whatever thoughts I might have. And I did so here with David from Toybox Audio, and I asked him, will you implement this triggering thing that I'm suggesting here? And he said that he's already thought about it and he doesn't want to do that because he wants to keep the synth as streamlined as possible. And adding 9 more different triggering options might make things a little bit more complicated. Now, he did say something else very interesting though. He said, you have a small PP. Now, he didn't say that at all. That's a complete fabrication on my side. And I keep doing this. I keep messing with my sponsors. Maybe I should apologize. What he did say was, I do have a plan in the future to do a more comprehensive sound design tool based on all of the ideas from these synths, with a lot of features and options for configurability. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with in the future. Now, I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I keep forgetting that I have a sample player engine. And the reason for that is simply because there's so much synthesis power inside the synth engine that I just keep playing with that and I forget about the sample engine completely. However, whenever I do rediscover that there is a sample engine in there, what I've been using it for is not actually loading up piano sounds or anything like that. No, I use it for texturizing my sounds. I'll use short impulse-like sounds and clicky noises to add oomph and attack to my stabs and my kicks and things like that. Other times I'll add that 20-second limit to add a much longer sound, something along the lines of a bad radio transmission, just to texturize a pad sound to make it sound more atmospheric. And for things like that, the sample player engine is perfect. In the end, you're the final judge of what you like, what you need, and what you like to listen to. Hopefully, I've been able to show you the true power of Buzzone and why I like this synthesizer so much. There is no greater privilege than to be able to talk about stuff you like and also getting paid at the same time. So I want to give a big shout out to Toybox Audio who sponsored this video. It is very, very awesome to be able to be sponsored by someone who doesn't want to mess with your content in any way and lets you say whatever you want to say. I am also very grateful that I have such a dedicated audience who watches my content, who sticks with me through thick and thin, wet and sun. There's some kind of saying you say here, but I'm Swedish. Now, I also want to thank my patrons who have been sticking with me even through the C19 era, which we don't talk about anymore. That was a horrible few years, but yeah, thank you so much for still being here. I'm very, very grateful. Now, if you look under this video in the comment section, there is a pinned comment at the top. I always put it there. In there, you'll be able to find links to Buzzone and also to Toybox Audio's site and a manual available at their site if you want to read into things a little bit more thoroughly. Now, with all of that said, thank you so much for watching this video, and if you watched all of it, that makes me really happy because I put everything I have into every video I make, and I always try to make it as entertaining as possible. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.